Okay, well, I want to welcome you to this morning's session. And as you can see, we're set up in interview style. So imagine we're in the studio of a talk show, and we're going to run this as an interview. And we have today with us a real cybersecurity professional. That's Slater. And he works for CASABA. He's a graduate of Washington State University, first with a degree in chemistry and then computer science later on. And he's been working at CASABA since 2020, since the beginning of 2020. And he started out doing web application security, and he's now migrated to iOS and or Mac OS and iOS security. And he does a lot of cryptographic reviews and ensures that appropriate cryptographic primitives are being used in the right context. So that's a little bit of background on his job. And so we're going to try to get into his head a little bit about what it's like to be a cybersecurity professional. I'm going to cover a few general topics after starting with the background. We're going to kind of go into a day in the life, and then talk about careers and get his perspective on what it takes to be a cybersecurity professional. What should you do to interview when you do your interviews? Because he does interviews with folks aspiring to be cybersecurity professionals. So without further ado, let's just dive right in, Slater. So to start, I want to know what drew you into the cybersecurity field, what piqued your interest?
So the answer I always kind of give is maybe well, I don't have a better way of phrasing this. It just kind of sounds badass to say like, oh, you're a hacker. Like telling someone that, it's like, whoa, that's so cool. So there's a level there of like, it's kind of cool. Like, what is it like playing the criminal, right? And that's a lot of my job, is being the criminal to an organization, using attack vectors, looking at what nation state hackers are doing and employing that against the company and saying, these are the types of things that I would attempt to do or I can do. One big thing is we don't have unlimited time, right? So when we do these types of things, we only have a certain amount of time, but it's kind of fun to like play the bad actor, find things, identify things, make things more secure. Part of my background, part of the company's background, which we'll talk about, we work with applications that are used by millions and billions of people. So we have a direct impact on the security of those. So that's kind of awesome to touch those types of applications to improve the safety of a lot of people. So that's a lot of what drew me to cybersecurity.
Cool. And so how did you prepare to become a badass? So what's the preparation involved? Starting in the early days and maybe moving through some of the educational experiences you had.
Sorry, guys. I love hearing that term badass thrown back at me. A lot of the preparation. So actually, my background in chemistry really helped. And so one of the areas I studied in chemistry was organic chemistry. And that was a big part of my research when I was doing chemistry. And part of organic chemistry is building up molecules and then breaking down molecules into the constituent pieces and understanding how things go together. Well, the systems that we attack are huge. It's not just like a web application login form and you can type in something and, oh, execute, done, that's my day. Like these are huge applications that have multiple layers that I'm going to start an attack here. It's going to get processed. It's going to go here. It's going to go here. It's going to go down the chain. And then at some point, it may come back up. And that's where we have a full-on attack. So having that ability to look at the overall architecture of a system and then start breaking down the different pieces of it and identifying, this area looks really interesting. This area is probably where I'm going to want to look at first. Those types of skills are crucial. Also, coming from the chemistry aspect is the research component. Cybersecurity changes every single day. Every single day, there's a new attack vector, a different attack vector, a new way of using an old school attack vector. So we have to be familiar. We have to learn that stuff and continue growing that knowledge. like life, I guess, well, my OChem professor says like life, organic chemistry is cumulative. Like life, cybersecurity is really cumulative too. Like all of these types of attack vectors and stuff, they all come back. So that was a lot of the preparation of like the research component of it. As far as the educational background, gaining familiarity with how computers work, how operating systems work. So systems programming, operating systems, those classes were really helpful with Casey Wang. As intimidating as some of those classes and those interviews are, they actually are very useful, especially when I look at lower level systems. Human-computer interaction, understanding how people process different fields or different outputs. The example I talked about yesterday with Dr. Hunhausen is take a simple log, like simple logs, or even take like, let's say simple logs for lack of my creativity. I suck at creativity. If I pass in somewhere input and I pass an anchor tag and href to a malicious website, and then I have click me or click here to download, and that's rendered in the logs as a hyperlink, a lot of people will just click on that link because it looks legit. You're going to trust that your organization has processed all this stuff. So it's coming from your organization as far as you're concerned. You're not going to inspect that hyperlink. You're not going to click like copy link or copy specifics and realize, oh, it's going to evilsite.com. I probably shouldn't go to it. So understanding that type of stuff, that background, how humans think, that gives me a perspective as, okay, as an attacker, this is how I want to make something look, or this is how I want to get it so that it will exploit someone. I mean, at the end of the day, that's my goal. Obviously, with the intent of saying, hey, this is how you fix it. Let's not ever have this happen. So a lot of those classes were useful. Gain familiarity with a broad range of languages. I work routinely in 6 to 8 different languages. My colleague knows 13 programming languages fluently. He can code in every single one of them. You ask him any interview question, he could answer it. So being able to look at even a new language and apply data structures and apply principles and saying, okay, I understand what's going on here. I understand even where you might want to fix it. All of those types of things are useful skills. And honestly, understanding this basic development, so interest in computer science, that kind of gives you, and if you actually go into development, it gives you a mindset of maybe what the developer was trying to do. And that type of understanding can help with like, hey, here's a potential mitigation. One thing you don't want to do is say like, oh yeah, here's a simple mitigation, but that simple mitigation is actually not possible given the architecture and stuff. So, I mean, on one hand, it's useless information. On the other hand, you kind of sound like an idiot. No offense to anyone who does that, but it kind of does sound stupid when you're like, yeah, this is how you fix it. And then that's like, I can't do that. And then you're like, oh, well, that's how you could have fixed it, you know, so.
So part of understanding your background is understanding the context of your work in terms of your company. So let's start with Cassava. Talk a little bit about Cassava and what its mission is.
So it's founded by 4 people, Chris Weber, Jason Glassberg, Brian Lewis, and Sam Buchholz. So it was originally founded by 4 people in 2002, and a lot of what we started doing was working with Microsoft. So let me just skip a few slides ahead. So just to kind of give an overview here's a large overview. So we started in Redmond, Washington, made in Seattle. We started with cloud security and looking at how the cloud operates. We went into Azure. We became the lead security auditors for Microsoft Azure. So here's a platform used by hundreds of millions of users. And from there, we branched out into the IoT space. We branched out into Facebook Messenger. So here's an application used by billions of users. WhatsApp Business, again, used by a lot of corporations. They just did their release a little bit ago. But we work in a large variety of clients, or work with a large variety of clients, anywhere from mobile, web security, cloud-based security, cryptographic reviews. We have someone who is on the cryptographic board for Microsoft who works with us. So working on that type of stuff. We do hardware security. So there's just a lot of different components that we look at, and that's a little bit about us.
So if a company comes to you and says, hey, Casaba, can you help us? Like, what types of services do you provide, and what value do you provide to your clients?
Absolutely. So some of the services we do, so we do a little bit of secure software development. So if a client wants like a certain functionality implemented securely, they can come to us and we can talk about the design and how we would approach it. And we can even develop. We do have developers on staff. I do some of the secure software development. But a lot of times clients will come to us and say, hey, here's a brand new product that we're going to release to the product, or here's a brand new feature that we're getting ready to add to this product that we're going to release. Pen test it, this is what we want. And what value they're looking for is, it's bad. If you get hacked, that's pretty bad optics. That can kill a product. Imagine if you had billions of users' data stolen. You think people are going to trust if you're like encrypted, if you're like an end-to-end encrypted chat application, or if you're being used by billions of people? That's optics. That's dangerous. So a lot of what clients do is they come to us to play the bad guys, like I previously had said, and they want us to attack the application and find these significant vulnerabilities, find them before other people find them, and find them very quickly. Again, we only have a few weeks or a few months. We don't have a year and a half to sit there and craft a perfect attack that's going to exploit millions of people. So the value that the clients get is they're working with security engineers that range in experience from me in 2020. I started learning Fortran years before that, but in 2020, starting as a security engineer, to my colleague is the former chief information security officer of MySpace. So I co-lead a team with him. We have people who are reverse engineering experts, people who are cryptographic experts, people who are cloud experts and cloud security experts. So putting those minds together to ensure that their infrastructure is secure, that's the value added. And saving the optics, saving the billions of dollars it can cost them.
That's important work. So having gotten a bit of background on you and your company, I want to dive into the title of this session, which is a day in the life. So what does a typical day in the life of Slater look like? What are your core activities? Just kind of walk us through a day. So maybe you have a slide for this too?
Yeah, I think I do. And I think, so here's some of the companies that we work with. So you can see we work with a lot of big names. Yeah, what is a day like? The PowerPoint says it. It's a tough question. And the reason is that I don't really have like a standard day. I may be in meetings. I may be scoping new projects. And so scoping new projects, we have to make sure that we allocate the appropriate amount of time, that we understand the full features of the application, everything that we're attacking, whether or not we can do it. So those types of aspects. As I said, I co-lead a team, so I have to make sure everyone's projects are going smoothly. And then other things I could be doing. I could be meeting with clients about threat modeling. And this is where we come in and sit down with the client and they're talking to us about their design. And we say, okay, but did you consider here that you could get DNS exfiltration? So we need to lock that down. What about right here? You were talking about admins are going to have privileges here. Do you have any intention to have MFA enabled here? When you're using multi-factor authentication, are you using text messaging? If you're using text messaging, you may be vulnerable to an SS7 attack. SS7 attack's not going to be vulnerable. You're not going to get exploited by an SS7 more than likely, unless someone wants to hack a WSU student. More than likely you're not. But imagine if an admin that's controlling billions of people, they're definitely a prime target. if I can get in and steal a bunch of people's information, I'm definitely going to use a lot of my resources against that person. So it could be a threat modeling discussion. It could be looking at code, and looking at code a lot of times. The way that we do these engagements is what's called a gray box approach. And so it's kind of like a mixture of open source and closed source, or previously known as black box, white box, or white box, black box, where we have access to the source code and we use the source code to develop attack vectors just to expedite, because we don't have that unlimited time frame. But we also treat it like we're an attacker, like we don't have as much knowledge. So I may go into an application and try to hack it and say, hey, weird, I got this strange error message. Let me go into the code and take a look, and let me see if I can identify where this is happening. Maybe I didn't craft my payload correctly. If I can go in there, maybe I find out they're using like DOM Purify, for example. Okay, well, DOM Purify is a classic HTML sanitizer. I can pull up documentation on DOM Purify, so then I might spend a few hours reading documentation, seeing if it's been exploited in the wild. If it has been exploited in the wild, how did that happen? Can I leverage any of these attacks that are previously known? If I can't, can I make a derivative of them and then use it? So every day really is different. And then projects are different too, right? I might be on a project for a few weeks, a few months, a week. And after that, I get a brand new project, brand new tech stack, and I have to start all over. I have to become an expert at it in the first week. And I mean, when I mean expert, I mean, we have to speak with developers as if we were developing the product. So we have that short window of time. So days vary from old school hacking, new school hacking, open source reviews, running different type of fuzzing tools, going into meetings, meeting with clients, meeting with high-ranking executives, talking about the design of their product. I've sat in meetings with CISOs. I've sat in meetings with C-suite executives and discussed the product, lead security engineers, people who are in charge of the overarching aspect of certain parts of companies. So, I mean, yeah, I have to like use creative language there, because there are things I'm not allowed to say. So I have to like navigate that line. So I apologize if I'm like, oh, well, and if you ever want more detail, you can just be like, what do you mean, or something. So.
Well, Slater, I'm struck by two things you said in your description. One is the extent to which you have to do research situationally to address knowledge gaps. Mm-hmm. So that's what we call in the education field information literacy. It's one of the core learning objectives of any engineering program, such as the one here at Washington State University. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about how you approach that problem. You said, well, I have to go and read documentation for 2 hours on whether that threat has been found in the wild, and whether that technology has been penetrated. What are some of your approaches to getting the knowledge you need to solve the problem?
So that's a great question. So really quickly, if let's say DOM Purify, I know they're using. I just Googled DOM Purify, read documentation, read what they're looking for. So in the case of DOM Purify, one really great thing about DOM Purify that I'll mention really quickly is that they don't use dependencies. So everything is written by them. We'll talk about that tomorrow in the securing the supply chain attack, where I can attack with dependencies. But they filter on a whole list of HTML tags that are being used, or HTML attributes, and they ensure that that is sanitized prior to being accepted. So, and prior to being output, and there's methods around that. So the first thing you might do is Google DOM Purify, look at that and look at the documentation, look at what it's filtering. You might try some dumb cases. Maybe I try an anchor tag, maybe I try a script tag, maybe I try a div. See kind of what's going on. All those get filtered. I then can go into CVEs, look at DOM Purify CVEs that are present, may open some of them, may read some of that and say, hey, you know, this is what's going on. Okay, this is the payload that was executed. They may say, yeah, this was patched in this other version. Okay, so now I have to pull up and see which version they're using versus which version is patched. Is that patched? Is that not patched? So a lot of times it's Googling, it's going on CVEs, it's looking at versions, it's going into those versions on GitHub or GitLab or wherever else they're being hosted. Sometimes it's extracting a certain method and just really looking at the method, researching the code, researching if anyone's found a vulnerability in the specific way it's being utilized. Yeah.
So the follow-up for me is, so one of the issues people have sometimes when they get into a new job is, where do I go for help when I'm stuck? And who do I ask? And am I going to look stupid if I go and ask someone? So tell me, how do you navigate that space? Do you have colleagues you can rely on to help you? And when do you approach them, and when do you know, well, maybe I need to do some extra work before I approach them?
You know, truthfully, I mean, I've been doing this about 2.5 years now, or well, under 2.5 years. And there's times where I'm still scared to ask a question and being like, oh, is this stupid? And so I bounce it off one of my colleagues and I say like, hey, you know what? Like, this is what I'm thinking of asking. Did I miss something? Do you feel this is stupid? So that's kind of the nature of engineering. You're going to feel stupid. It doesn't matter what field you go into. It doesn't matter if you go into cybersecurity, get over it. We'll never get over it. Like, you do not have to, if you get hired at a job, there's a reason that you got hired. It was not just because it cost a lot of money to hire someone. It cost a lot of money to onboard someone. It cost a lot of developers, engineers time to onboard someone. We want you to succeed. We don't want you to feel stupid. So yeah, always ask questions. That's one of the things. And it's a fear that you just have to get over. Absolutely. In our company, like the team sizes we work on are between 2 to 5 people. I commonly work with people in 2 to 3, a team size of 2 to 3. And absolutely, we ask each other questions all the time. We may ask for documentation for it. We may say, hey, you know, read this code with me. Like, let's share screens. Let me read through this. Let me make sure that what I think is right. I may just say, hey, go look at or just go look at this file, or go look at lines 100 through 200 and see what you think. And they may say, that doesn't seem right. And I'll be like, yes, I see an issue too. Or they may say there's nothing wrong. So absolutely, you get to, there are always people that are willing to help you. And if we're not knowledgeable in the area, there's always someone else. And like in the context of our company, there's always someone else you can ask. You could Teams message them and say, hey, can you talk to me about like best practices here? For example, with Terraform, we have people who understand Terraform deployments really well. We have people who don't understand Terraform really well. Azure, we have people who do Azure a lot, AWS a lot. I'm more in the AWS scene than the Azure scene. We have people who understand macOS and iOS. You come to us with questions if you're looking at something. And if you're like, hey, this is completely out of my wheelhouse, we hop in, like take a look and look for different things. So yeah, absolutely, there's always people to help. A lot of the way that you get over feeling stupid though is again, like I said, I always feel like stupid. I have permanent beginner's mindset is what I say. But a lot of the ways is you find something and you're like, hey, you know, maybe this isn't a big deal. And so you ask someone. And you know, so I asked one of my colleagues and they're like, yeah, you know, that does seem a little silly. That does seem wrong. Or like, oh my God, that's a huge finding. Wow, that's massive. So, you know, you talk about it, you file it, and you say, like, this is my perceived severity of the finding. And what can really build confidence is when that development team then is like, wow, this is huge. Like, this is a critical, this is massive, this is a general release blocker. That's where you start to be like, oh, I'm starting to like, I actually found something. So a lot of times, if a person's brand new to cybersecurity, I'll have them run NPM audit or Yarn audit or Sneak. And those are just tools that identify vulnerabilities on the dependencies. So if it's a web application and it's built with Yarn, then I might just have them run Yarn audit because that's their first finding. Once you get your first finding under your belt, you kind of already feel smarter, feel like you know a little bit more, and that kind of just gives you confidence.
So if I have a problem with a specific area, so let's say I want to learn something about machine learning, I can go onto the WSU faculty website and notice that Larry Holder is an expert in machine learning. So I go talk to him maybe about a problem I'm having. How does that work at a company level? How do you know figure out who to go to for certain problems? Are there certain established experts? So how does a social network work in a process regarding finding the help you need?
So for instance, we have a cryptographic expert. His name is Dr. John Mishner. He was on the cryptography board of Microsoft. So if I have a cryptographic question and I don't know the answer, maybe it's something as simple as, hey, they're using an empty string as the initialization vector. By the way, don't ever do that. It's very bad. But there's your free security advice. So no. But maybe I don't understand why that's an issue. So I go to him and I say, I don't understand why using a empty string as the initialization vector here, or using a hard-coded initialization vector is bad. And he'd say something like, okay, well, here's the reason why. I may ask a more complicated question, like, what security concerns do I have with AES GCM mode? And he would tell you, for instance, that it can only be used for, let's see, I think it's 64 kilobytes. KB, is it? I don't remember, it's 64 something. I don't remember the exact context, but he'd write a whole article about, here's what you have to worry about when you're using AES GCM mode, for example. So that's an example for like cryptography. Our company is very small. It's 33 people. So we kind of all know each other. And so when you're new, if we don't know the answer, like if I don't know the answer, I know exactly who to send you to. And if we have no idea who knows it in the company, we just send out a massive email to everyone to say, hey, what's considered best practice? And someone will respond.
Okay. So one of the other things that struck me in your day in life is how much you communicate with with clients, with people with different levels of technological knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you communicate about cybersecurity technical issues with a corporate executive who maybe doesn't understand security? How do you bridge that gap?
So that is a great question. That's something that you're going to have to do as a developer, as any engineer. If you're just a software developer, yeah, you might be coding with other software developers or other software engineers, but you are going to have to write business-facing documentation at some point, which means you are going to have to write documentation that is written at a high level of abstraction. So you're not going to be able to go into all this technical wizardry or whatever of like, this is how it works. So how do you do it? You really, you have to just boil down what you're trying to say. So if I say you're vulnerable because of a empty string as an initialization vector, for example.
I say, what's an initialization vector?
Oh.
What do you say to that?
So that would be a great question. I would say, well, this is something that's employed, or this is something that's used in encryption algorithms, and it helps with the entropy or the randomness of the encryption algorithm. And you might say like, well, why does that matter? Everything's encrypted. And I would say, well, if you have an empty string or a hard-coded initialization vector, I can derive the encryption parameters for everything, which means I can decrypt everything, which means if it's an end-to-end encrypted chat, I've just completely broken your end-to-end encryption guarantee. Well, they may not have understood the whole hard-coded initialization vector, but yeah, I just completely broke your end-to-end encryption guarantee. They understand that pretty well. So being able to—
that affects the bottom line.
That's where the thing is if you're talking to a business exec, you really need to be very clear on the impact of what you have identified. Being able to say, this is the problem with it. The moment that business exec hears that this is a risk because it exposes user data, privacy, information disclosure, end-to-end encryption, it violates guarantees that they have promised. Those types of things mean that it gets fixed that day. And I've seen that. I've seen developers pull all-nighters to fix things. And I've seen messages at midnight and 1 in the morning being like, okay, I think I've done this. So like, you know, those types, when you really define that impact, that is when business execs really understand, okay, this is an issue, or I don't really care. It's not a big issue. And no exec's going to say, oh, you know, you can get millions of user data. I don't really care. That's fine. But they may say something like, okay, yeah, you know, maybe we shouldn't use memcopy here. Yeah, that's best practice, but it's not exploitable in any way, shape, or form. We talked to the lead engineer. It's absolutely not exploitable. We don't really care.
So I guess a related question here, and maybe this is less of an issue than it used to be, but I know when, you know, back in the day, when people were pretty naive about security, it might have been a tougher sell to say, look, you should really be careful about this. What's your experience in the modern day? You have clients just kind of like lined up on understanding the importance of what you do, or do you have to do any kind of advertising or salesmanship?
So tough question. Do you have to do advertisement? Not really at all. Okay, so let's rewind. When COVID first became prevalent in the US, so early 2020, organizations were shutting down, layoffs were happening against different companies, software engineers were being laid off. Cybersecurity made it like expenses on cybersecurity went up huge. Why? You have developers who are laid off who now have nothing better to do than mess with your stuff. You have organizations that are now worried, what if a breach happens or something? Like, we don't know where the economy's headed, and this could cost us millions of dollars, billions of dollars. So cybersecurity expenses have gone up significantly. So people are aware of the risk of cybersecurity. Take SolarWinds. The moment that happened, all of a sudden companies are like, whoa, 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 we want to make sure our entire system is completely secured, our supply chain is completely safe. You know, guarantee that. Now, in cybersecurity as a whole, well, and as security engineers in a whole, one of the difficulties is if a breach happens on something that you reviewed. Security engineering is a very special field in that we make more work for developers sometimes, and we also save companies money and save people's data and stuff like that. But sometimes we cost companies a lot of money because they have to delay features. They may have to bring more devs from a certain project back to another project. All that stuff costs money. So that sometimes is a hard sell in that, why does this feature need to be fixed right away? So I guess where I'm going with this is security engineering sometimes is like, oh, these people are going to make more work for us. On the flip side, if we miss something, oh, it does not look good. And oh, it's not forgotten. And oh, 5 years down the road, if it was something we looked at, guarantee you customers are going to bring it up and say, hey, why did you not find this 5 years ago? When you looked at this product, why was this sitting here the whole time? I mean, that is the nature of cybersecurity. Is you're going to be blamed, even if it's years down the road, even if other people have looked at. If it was something that you looked at, like, yeah, it's going to come back. So your reputation matters a huge amount. The ability of finding criticals, the ability of having CVEs published by you, having sort of like building up this trust with all these clients, that takes time. The moment you have that established, at that point, just don't lose it.
There's a lot of trust involved. And what you said about, getting blamed for things you missed, that's when it becomes an issue.
Mhm.
And what strikes me about that is, isn't that true for technology in general? You know, in my own field of human-computer interaction, a user interface that doesn't get in the way silently succeeds. And I imagine an interface, a product that doesn't have security vulnerability silently succeeds. It's only when something goes wrong that you get fingers pointed and then your reputation is on the line.
Absolutely. No, and that's true. It's prevalent in a lot of different fields. The reason I would point to security, typically when you're doing development, you have QA engineers, you have tests, you have a lot of different layers, you have different code review styles that you have to get through. So the blame, and I use the term blame in quotations because we are human, it's more dispersed amongst different people. Now, if you're a small development shop or you're a startup, you're gonna be hit with that feature and that problem. In security, we're 3 people that looked at a product for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. That company paid money for us to do. There's millions of lines of code. These products can be huge. So we have to trust the other 2 team members that, or anyone on our team, that they are doing their job, that they are looking at things that, 4 weeks down the road, I'm not going to have to hop over and start doing everything that this person was supposed to be doing or something like that. That's where I would say that security gets a little more finger pointing. Also, that's in a development shop. If you delay release, like that's a bad thing. You don't want to do that. But security, if you get a breach or something like that, that's gonna not be good.
Okay, well, so in terms of the day in the life, we heard, I think, a number of themes, the importance of being able to do on-the-spot research to address knowledge gaps that you didn't have, and that's just a regular part of the job.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things. Another thing is communicating to your audience in terms of that makes sense to them. So if you're communicating with business-minded people, talking about bottom lines is really important. And knowing who to ask and when to ask questions is really important. So those are some of the themes I heard in what you were saying. And we could go on and on. We could talk about the important tools and technology, but I'm sensitive to the fact we only have about 10 minutes left, and I want to ask a couple of questions about how people out there who are interested in getting into the cybersecurity profession can really improve their chances. So, what are some of the questions you asked during an interview with a prospective employee, and what advice would you give in terms of those of us who want to get into your field?
So
the interview process.
Yeah, so the interview process for us is typically 4 phone calls. You have an initial phone call with me, and we talk for an hour to an hour and a half. And I guess one thing I would say is, so I don't do video. We don't do video. So I'm very sensitive when I ask like a technical question and I hear keyboard clicking. I get very sensitive to that because I don't know what's going on. So that's, I guess, one thing I would say is like, if you're on a phone interview, probably not the best time to be typing in your keyboard, even if you're trying to write down answer questions or anything, just because I'm not aware of what you're doing. So I have to assume, especially when it's coupled with, that's a great question. That's very interesting. I'm trying to think about this, and it doesn't look good. So the optics of that, and I have heard that. I've done a lot of interviews, and I've heard that quite a bit. And so I guess that's the one thing is I would say is be sensitive. So we do 4 phone calls. It's 3 security engineers, and it's a partner in the company. And I go through some standard questions. So, tell me a little bit about your background. Tell me what programming languages you know. Tell me a little bit about your interests, how you stay up to date with InfoSec, risk, and stuff. I'm gauging on that is, there are times where people are applying for jobs where you kind of just shotgun resumes out to a lot of different people. And security engineering is a very specific field. Same with software development. So really being interested in cybersecurity is going to go a long way because it is a high pressure field. Development also is a high pressure field, it's just different pressure. So those are some of the questions I'd ask. When we get into the technical things, there's going to be definitions, right? So define to me what public key cryptography is. You know, if I'm sending a message to you, whose key do I use? What are the benefits of symmetric encryption over public key cryptography or asymmetric encryption? And I try to tailor them to your resume a bit. So resume-wise, it's probably not best to put standard ML or Erlang if you've seen it once ever, because I might ask a question about it, and I've seen on some resumes where it's like, it's a language a person saw one time ever throughout their entire college career. I ask a question on, they say, I'm not familiar with it. So representing, be comfortable with every skill that you have on your resume. So, you know, encryption questions, I may ask something like, hey, let's say I have this application, it has these features, talk to me about a test plan. And I'm not looking for specifics. I'm not looking for like, you know, I would look at the RTP and analyze the calling mechanisms. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for like, you know, would you look at the package manifest? Would you look for vulnerable components? What APIs would you look for if you had access to the source code? If I told you this has messaging capability, what types of things would you be looking for with messaging? There's zero-click vulnerabilities, like an iMessage with developed by NSO Group. There was that zero-click vuln that happened. So maybe I'm looking for derivatives of that. If I tell you there's calling, audio and video calling, for example, what are some of the concerns you might have with that? I like that question because it gets you a little bit thinking outside the box. For example, if you and I are in a phone call, you're going to see 6 buttons, right? One of them is going to be a mute button. Making sure that mute button works. That is a privacy problem. Now, that sounds boring as a hack, but there's really cool hacks you can do with that I've looked at. State machines. What are some best practices with state machines? The answer to that would be minimize the amount of states that your application can be in. That was one of the problems with SSL. When TLS came out, it had significantly reduced the number of state machines, which had enhanced the security of it. I may ask, what tools do you use? So tools that I commonly use are things like, let's see, right there. That's a list of a lot of tools that I use. So do you have familiarity with Burp Suite, for example? That's an intercepting proxy. It's used to look at network traffic and to replay network traffic or to send requests. So that is one of the biggest tools that we use. So having familiarity with that, having familiarity with Wireshark as well, that's useful for a lot of packet sniffing. Those are types of questions that I would ask.
Okay, one more question I have for you, because we're running out of time, and maybe we can get to some audience questions after this. How do you feel about the job market at this point? What's the outlook for people going into cybersecurity, the cybersecurity profession right now? So
cybersecurity is only growing. It's estimated that there's going to be 33%. I have a bunch of stats that I just, sweet. So yeah, 33% growth between 2020 and 2030. It's estimated to cost $10 trillion annually globally by 2025. Cybersecurity is a big deal. Things are changing. Remote work has led to even more vulnerabilities. Supply chain attacks have led to more vulnerabilities. New tech stacks, new languages, new features of languages have led to more vulnerabilities. Security is a completely iterative process, which means you have to keep going back and keep looking at things. There's a huge amount of job security and job growth in the industry.
Okay, we got about 3 minutes left. I'm wondering if anyone out there has some questions for Slater about what he does. Yes.
What policies, if any, do you find that affect your job? Wish that could become the
So let me repeat the question for those on Zoom. What policies, if any, you find affect your job. All right.
So, I don't know if I have a good, I don't know if I have a good answer to that question, truthfully. So like, policy-wise, I mean, obviously not sharing knowledge between clients. That's a big deal. So, you know, if I get a client with a similar feature as another client, I can't be like, oh, I hacked this client this way. I wonder if I can do it with you. Because now I've just disclosed a major vulnerability in this other person. So I don't wish that would be different because you don't, I mean, that's optics. But that can sometimes make things challenging. I'm trying to think of like other things. I mean, each company has like certain tools you can use, certain tools you're not allowed to use. So even if you want to use a certain tool, you can't use it, you can't touch it, doesn't matter. Each company has requirements on you have to use their hardware, you have to be on a managed system. Some companies want to manage your own computer, so then you have to figure out that. So there's things like that. It can sometimes be challenging because then you need like 5 different computers to work with 5 different companies. I guess, does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to let's take this opportunity to thank Slater for his insightful answers. If you do have questions for him, he will be around today and tomorrow. And come up to him and introduce yourself and ask about what he does. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Would be a copy of your slides posted so we can see the ones that we kind of skipped
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, if I was going to be interviewing in this area, I'd want to know 1 or 2 slides back there, all of those softwares that are available for cybersecurity. And get, even if you interview with a company that doesn't use that one, the fact that you know something about it and what its features are, how to work it, and practice would be really helpful. I would hire somebody who comes in like that. Eager